Thanks.
Okay,
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. This is the meeting of the Hawaii Tax Review Commission, and I'd like to call the meeting to order now at 12:05. First item on the agenda, do we have any public testimony? Seeing none. Has anybody had any meetings about Tax Review Commission business with any outside participants? Okay, if none, then let's move on to approval of the minutes of June 16th. Are there any corrections or additions? Hearing none, all in favor of approving, oh wait, I do need to call for the question. Would somebody like to make a motion?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Murray. A second?
Second.
Kate, okay, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any objections? Any abstentions? Okay, minutes approved. So the next item is discussion of our consultant needs and priorities. And I'm hoping that you have given that some thought from the things that you're going to work. Just kind of as a starting point, some of the things I was thinking of is having a consultant take a look at what has been reviewed and recommended by past commissions as far as the things that we've identified as our priorities. And those are standard deduction and personal exemption, compliance, tax credits and GET exemptions, wealth and property taxes, and a Simpson-Bowles commission. So all of those have come up in the past. And so a consultant would be helpful in seeing what the commissioners recommended back in the day, as well as if any of these issues were addressed by the last TRC in 2015-17, it would be in the PFM report. So it would be good to get that information, bring it up to date, and share that with us so that we have a good starting point and don't have to spend a whole lot of time looking at that. I know that for the recommendations that we will be making, there will probably be some calculations about what the impact is as far as revenues and the cost benefits to the state in doing those things. And then we have some new things that have not been addressed by previous TRCs, like the greenhouse gas impact fee and potentially visitor green fee kinds of things. So do you have some specific items that you want to make sure that we ask our consultant to do?
Beth?
Yes.
I do. I think you covered it in your analysis, but both prior, the latest one and the one before that did deal with the issue of standard deduction and personal exemption, and they ran some numbers about the effects. So certainly we'd want those updated, as you mentioned. And then the other thing is in the 2017 report, they did a projection of revenue from all sources of tax up through, I think, 2025 maybe. And it would be really interesting to see how that projection's tracking, just from a tax adequacy standpoint, to see how the projection is working.
That's a great idea.
I think the only one, Beth, that I didn't hear you say, you covered, as Catherine said, the list pretty well. I think one I don't remember hearing you say just now was the taxation of defined benefit versus defined contribution retirement money, which
Correct.
And it will be very unpopular. I get it will be very unpopular to tax ante or who hasn't been taxed before or whatever, but it seems like a basic equity issue that you got $2 or the same dollar, they're just coming from different sources. Where, you know, two different types of retirement plans. One gets taxed, the other one doesn't. Feels like that should be looked at too.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I agree. Yeah. I didn't talk about this too much, but I know that we had a meeting not too long ago where we talked about compliance, audit and compliance, and the potential for bringing in a lot more revenue if we beefed that up. I think it would behoove us to have the consultant kind of put some numbers around that. How much would it cost to improve the staffing and expertise to ensure compliance, and how much would we be able to bring in?
Yeah, in the earlier meeting with Director Choi, I thought they had numbers around that. I was gonna inquire with them in their budget presentation.
Yes,
You know, you're probably right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's going back to the presentation.
tax, yeah.
Writing. Yeah. For the other work that some of you are doing, are there some specific things that you want to make sure that we have a consultant helping you with? Just to remind you, on our next meeting is going to be Kate, and she's going to be talking about standard deduction and personal exemption to mirror the federal government. Compliance enforcement to collect what's owed. I have Sale and Alton planning to work on that for August 11th. Is that still going to work? Okay. Tax rates and compliance for real property, wealth, and conveyance. That's me on August 18th. Winston, I've got you reforming tax credits and exemptions on in September. I don't have a date for that, but we'll have to set one pretty soon so we make sure it's on the calendar. Simpson Bowles Light Commission, I've got you for that, Alton.
Yes.
Equitable taxation on retirement income, unassigned, but we'll get the consultant to bring the numbers up to date. Just to let you know, the increasing visitor fees to offset costs, I reached out to the people that I spoke with almost a year ago on the green fee visitor impact, and I didn't get a reply. So I don't know whether they're still working on it or whether my contact information is not up to date. So maybe I can consult with the people at the on staff at DOTAX to see if we can figure that out. And then we also need to make sure that once we have identified all of our priorities and have all our numbers, we need to figure out how they all work together as a package. So that will require some expert consulting, I think, too.
And that consultant will have to integrate a lot with Seth's folks, because Seth, I think, expressly said those types of calculations are things that he can help with. So it wouldn't necessarily all be on the consultant. In drafting any kind of a engagement or a work order, if you will, with a consultant, we want to make sure that Seth takes a good look at that and make sure we don't pay a consultant to do something that Seth and his people can do and really are better suited to do.
Good idea.
And related, not actually directly related, but still on the topic of the consultant, beyond the specific ideas that we're talking about that we want them to research and put numbers to and so forth, beyond that, we do need to make sure that some consultant has the role of integrating this into a coherent single document, right? Because if we have this piece from McKenna, let's say, on the carbon tax, and we have this piece from another consultant on something else, and that needs to be put into a coherent document at the end of the day. And so for that, you're looking for someone more with good professional writing skills, report writing skills, than you are a tax expert per se. But that needs to be in there too, unless one of us wants to write it. And I'm guessing probably wouldn't have a lot of volunteers for that, but the consultant would probably be good for that too.
I'm sure that much as any of us would like to write it, it might be difficult. Okay, great. Any other comments? We do anticipate that next month we will have a face-to-face meeting and perhaps more in coming months. And some of that money needs to be used for transportation costs, but that's probably. Okay, if we've pretty much settled that, Murray, are you ready to go on and talk about the discussion on greenhouse gas impact fees?
Yeah,
Or
I can start talking about it. Dr. Coffin had another scheduling issue where she's not able to join us until 12:30. So the risk is that you have to listen to me for 15 minutes unless someone else wants to ask questions or chime in, which I welcome, by the way. But I'll kind of go over at a high level the proposal that we got from Dr. Coffin. And then when she comes on, maybe we can then save her mostly for the Q&A, since she's the real expert. Does that sound all right? And did everyone get the copy of the proposal in the meeting materials for this meeting? Was that not distributed? Oh,
No, did you send it to Seth? If you sent it to Seth, it didn't get to us.
I may have sent it to same person, Beth, that was emailing you about the schedule and when Dr. Coffin was going to join us. I can't remember who that was, but I was on that same email thread.
Ah.
Okay, well, I guess I will, you know what? Who could I send it to now that could send it to the whole group? Because I don't think I've got everyone's email address. Should I just send it to you for now, Beth, and then.
Or you could send it to me, Tulial or roderick.e.tulial@hawaii.gov.
Okay, great, got that. I'll just put carbon tax in the subject line. Let me just attach the document right now.
And then if you want to share your screen, you're allowed to share your screen so that they can see it.
I'll do that in just a second. Let me just send this thing off and then I'll share my screen. The good news is it's not very complex in terms of the proposal, so I can still review it with y'all on the line here. Okay, that should be good. It's off to Roderick. Okay, so sharing screen. Although I'll mostly be talking my way through this, so the screen may be of limited help, but can you guys see that Word document? Carbon pricing study, TRC?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what Dr. Coffin put together after I described what we were interested in. And she had to take some time, and this is the same crew of people that worked on the first carbon tax study. So there's nothing really new on the team side, I don't believe. She goes through kind of the history of the carbon tax and what she did in the previous study, which is redundant to the conversations we've already had. The first kind of new material is right here where it says there will be two parts to this work. So what she said, one of the things that we wanted her to do that she, or potentially wanted her to do that she's not really well suited to do based on the data, is the inter-island proportional impact. So we understand that she did quintiles of income from the lowest income to the highest income, and she talked about how the tax would affect people and whether they'd be better off or not. But we were hoping to get some stuff on neighbor island versus Oahu and things like that to see if the neighbor islands would be more heavily taxed because of, you know, Young Brothers shipping or something like that than Oahu, to make sure there was no sort of neighbor island inequities. And as she looked at the data, she found that that was just not something she could do. The data wasn't rich enough to really piece apart the different islands and figure out how much inter-island transport, you know, Maui used versus Big Island versus Oahu, for example. But what she can do is look at the sectors that are being taxed. As it says here, remove air travel because of the federal law that basically prevents the state from levying taxes on air travel. And then really look at assumptions about the return of revenues to the households. And for this, she's going to focus on the social cost of carbon numbers, because remember, she did the social cost of carbon numbers, and then she did those really high, like $400 to $1,000 numbers, which raised a lot of money, but it kind of really shrank the economy and was kind of too aggressive. So she's going to focus this follow-on work, if we decide to go forward with it, on the social cost of carbon numbers, which are those lower numbers, and then figure out how much could the state possibly use to increase their budget. Because one of the things I think we talked about as a group before is her previous work was either it all goes to the state or it all goes back to the people in equal shares. And that analysis is simple, but and we like the idea that if all the money goes back to the residents of Hawaii in equal shares, pretty much every quintile group is better off financially, in large part because the visitor money, the visitor contribution, if you will, to the carbon tax gets distributed to the residents of Hawaii. So everyone's better off, even though they're being taxed. That was a great finding, right? We want to find out, can the state spend some of that money, not all of it, and still have most people, at least the lower 4 quintiles, for example, still be better off. So she wants to look at, in her example here, if the government spent 20% of it and the other 80% was given back, how does that affect those quintile groups? And then even within that, there's 2 ways of doing that. If you're really focused on kind of protecting those lower 4 quintiles, you could have the money be distributed only to the lower 4 quintiles, or you could have it distributed to everyone equally and just see how that shakes out. So that's kind of what she's talking about in these paragraphs, to see if the government spent some of that money but gave most of it back, at what point, are the lower 4 quintiles, so call it low, middle, and kind of maybe even upper middle income folks, are they better off or worse off? And look at different ways of doing that. So that's part 1. And then also the second part talks about administrative issues, best practices in terms of how to apply such a tax. Are we talking about just changing the barrel tax? Is there some other way that it would be translated or applied? What's the most efficient way of doing it? And then a big one, especially for the lower income folks, will be how frequently should that payment be distributed? So for example, even if it's completely true that everyone is better off with a carbon tax because, again, the visitor carbon tax is going to the residents, if you have people that are, living hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, just barely getting by, and you're taxing them all year long, they're actually worse off all year round. And then if at the end of the year they get a dividend payment, great, but how do they finance having less money all year round, right? So there's this issue of how frequently, could you pay the dividend back monthly, so they don't have to wait a year to kind of get that better off kind of balancing of their income, if you will. So it's different things like that she wanted to look at in terms of how you tax it, how you apply it, how often you pay out the dividend, which is going to be, I think, interesting for our report if we decide to include carbon tax in our list of recommendations, because it'll be something brand new and you got to really think about how to apply it and how to not, inadvertently hurt people, even if they're better off by the end of the year, what happens during the year. So it's kind of that approach. And just to get down to the bottom line here, she had a timeline that was really tight. In fact, she had a timeline that wanted to go into January initially. And I said, oh, we can't do January. We got to get a report out. And so as you can see here in the write-up, she had the report coming out by November 30th. Even that will be really, really tight. So that's something we should probably talk about maybe when we get Seth back, if that's going to be soon enough. But she's going to be fairly crammed to get it done by November 30th, according to what she told me. And she can answer questions about that when she comes on here in a few minutes. And this would be the budget. So the bottom line is $66K for that work to really flesh out how to apply the carbon tax. Can the government spend some of it? How does that shake out in terms of people being better off? How do you do all that administrative stuff, which might be boring to some people, but the legislature, if they're going to look at this, is going to need to know that type of thing. So this is her very brief proposal. Again, she'll be on in a few minutes to answer questions, but if you guys want to try me for any questions, there's maybe some of this I could answer, but she'll be on shortly for any kind of hard questions you might have.
Let me ask you, and if you don't have the answer, we'll defer to her, but you said that she doesn't have the expertise to analyze the differential costs for neighbor islands. I'm wondering whether anybody else at UHERO or at the university might have that expertise who could contribute at least that a review to ensure that we're not overlooking that.
I think the answer is no. And the reason why, and she can clarify, but the reason I think the answer is no is it wasn't an expertise issue, it was a data issue. So they had to look at the granularity of the data, what data was there, and it looked like they'd have to kind of do a little bit too much guesstimation, if you know what I mean, on certain areas. And as academic researchers, they want to stay pretty close to the data and not kind of extrapolate a lot, if you know what I mean. So it's really a data issue, I think, not an expertise issue. But she can answer further questions about that.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yep. I think how much
Well,
approved, was it 250 that we got approved for funding for the TRC?
Rick, do you have that off the top of your head? That sounds about right to me. Anybody on staff?
We can check that for you guys.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
My memory tells me 250, and if that's true, then you can see at 66K, there's still plenty of room for other consultants, for a writer to do the final report and other things, I think.
Yeah,
And it looks like she should be joining us in just a couple of minutes.
any other questions for Murray? I'm going to check my email and make sure that I have this document and read it through while we're waiting for Dr. Coffman.
Yeah, it looks like it just came in from Roderick.
Great.
So everyone should have it now.
Yes, correct. The amount is 250,000.
Thank you.
I guess I can probably stop the screen share now, yeah, because everyone's had a chance. Everyone's got the document themselves now, I believe. That's probably something we'll have to think about once we talk more about hiring a consultant to put the final document together. Is that person or company or whoever we're going to use is going to have to really, as we look at this timeline, kind of be Johnny on the spot to get it done quickly? Because if we're having, I'm assuming if we have other consultants that are going to take a few months to, get back to us with reports and stuff, and it's going to take a little bit of time to contract, we're going to have reports, that the component reports, the pieces kind of coming in, I'm guessing November, and we have to have this report. I don't know, do one of the DOTAX folks know the exact date we have to have the report out, the final report?
I am guessing that typically reports are due at the end of the calendar year, so as to provide enough information, lead time for the legislature. I wonder whether it might be feasible for us to get an extension. However, I hope that we will be able to get this done in time for the 2022 legislature, or it won't be very timely at all.
So I'd like to welcome Dr. Coffin. Looks like you're on now. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we didn't clip off your previous meeting early to have you join us.
No, hi everyone. Thanks for the invitation to come back, and sorry I couldn't join at noon, but yes, I'm jumping from Zoom to Zoom. So here I am. Thank you.
And just to get you caught up, hopefully I didn't do too bad of a job, but we had some time, so I went over at a very high level the proposal that you gave me and kind of what it would cover, and mentioned that the neighbor island issue, the data just wasn't there, and there were some questions about that. But I hit it at a high level, but if you want to either review it or if there's questions, Beth, that the group has here.
Dr. Kaufman, maybe you could just give us a real quick rundown from your point of view. I'm sure it will be similar to what Murray said, but you know, it doesn't hurt to hear it twice.
It'll sound a whole lot smarter when she says it.
Perhaps.
Well, so this is this scope of work was developed from a conversation with Murray that we had a couple weeks ago, where really, these lingering questions that came up in the report that we didn't address there, most of them just being outside of the scope of work. And also, I think, particularly the issue of the dividends just raised further questions in Murray and other people's minds about what's possible. So from that conversation, I drafted this scope of work for this meeting, to think about alternative revenue scenarios primarily as kind of the extension of the original report. There are an infinite number of scenarios we could pick here, right? There's sort of an infinite number of ways to slice and dice the revenue assumptions within the model. And so we, wrote this scope with sort of 3 additional scenarios as in terms of return of dividends to households, as well as this issue of sectors taxed, which I think the last time I came to talk to you about the findings of the report was something that Seth Colby had brought up, right? That this assumption about taxing about jet fuel is kind of an assumption, right? And just in terms of it's not that it's absolutely not, well, it's again, outside of legal expertise, right? It's something that would require sort of deeper legal tax expertise to weigh in on. And also, I don't think has been tremendously tested within the US per sort of anti-head tax laws, right? So one slicing of this extension would also be to see how the results are robust to assuming that it cannot be levied on jet fuel, right? And then also these alternative revenue scenarios. And then the other aspect that was brought up in my conversation with Murray was more of these administrative questions, which were outside of the initial scope. So this is more sort of considerations for implementation that have come up in conversations and things we might address there, particularly related to, how would the tax actually be levied as an extension to the barrel tax? How frequently or what form should the dividend payments be made in? Are dividend payments taxable is often an implementation question. And then, are there other implications to public finance that might be sort of notable that we want to document? An example there would be declines in use of fossil fuels by design, right, by purpose, which would then reduce gasoline tax revenues, for example. So that, so that's what's in the scope. What's not in the scope, and as I heard you talking about when I came on, are these questions were more particularly to island specific impacts. That was a deep point of conversation. I wish we could do it. It's so interesting. But we went and kind of dug up the existing data that we have, and it would be really, really difficult, not feasible in this time frame.
I'm just wondering, I know that Murray had mentioned like the cargo ships back and forth, but I know that utilities, I believe that utilities, and I know that gas prices tend to be higher on neighbor islands. And is that something that you could estimate the impact for? Or is that also not really feasible?
Well, assuming competitive markets, the change would be equal across, right? The tax delta would still be even, so the baseline is higher on in neighbor islands outside of Oahu in general, but the delta should be approximately the same from the carbon tax incidence, assuming they're competitive markets. So I don't know that that's, you could sort of say it has, a higher price, but the delta wouldn't necessarily be higher because of the starting higher price, if that makes sense.
And by delta, you mean the difference between what you pay and the dividend that you get back? Is that right?
Yes, and the gasoline, the price you'd experience at the pump, the difference in the price of what you'd experience at the pump.
That's just to be clear, McKenna, that's because it's not a sales tax where it's a percentage of the price. It's a carbon tax, which is a dollar amount per ton of carbon. So it doesn't change if gas prices are higher on one island or the other, because it's based on the carbon content, not the retail price.
Exactly.
Not a sales tax.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Winston here. You'll have to forgive me. I missed the original presentation because I wasn't yet a member of the commission. But I just had a question about, in terms of this dividend idea or the direct transfer of revenues to residents, has it been implemented by any other jurisdiction or state or county? And is there a model for that Hawaii could follow?
Not in the US in the form of a carbon tax. There are examples in the US where this is done for kind of the opposite of a carbon tax, right? Alaska has their oil money's dividend that they give back to residents. It's different. It's not necessarily the design we would recommend for a carbon tax. It's you take the oil revenues and it's an investment fund, and residents are given a proceed from the investment fund. So it is a little distinct. But this idea, you know, in the reverse is there are similarities. Within other countries, there are analogs. British Columbia in Canada is probably the closest, where people are given a portion of the revenues back, not all of it, but a portion.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess the other comment is that in terms of, you know, reaching out for an analysis of this, the two issues that we wouldn't be able to determine based on either the time frame or lack of data, or maybe lack of expertise, are the impact on outer islands compared to Oahu, and also I guess the legality and how we would apply this, and whether a tax on jet fuel would be, you know, constitutional or permissible because of the Constitution and Dormant Commerce Clause. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yes, that's correct. So
Okay.
give us insight, not to the legality of it, because, you know, I mean, you know, you or I can read the Anti-Head Tax Act, and I think probably a tax lawyer can make interpretations of what might hold up in court based on case law, which would be really useful. But it would give insight into the economic and greenhouse gas impacts if it was not able to extend to jet fuel.
Okay.
I would like to comment on the other options that you're looking at in terms of using and distributing the revenues. And the constituency that I'm usually concerned about are low-income households who really can't afford any additional tax. And so I am also, you know, I'm happy that the original proposal said they would get a disproportionate amount if it were distributed on a per household basis. But I also understand that investing in energy efficient appliances, cars, PV systems for the house, all of those things take a lot of upfront capital. And so I don't know whether those issues are contemplated in this, or whether maybe if part of the money went to the state could invest in what we might call infrastructure, or kind of an equity development, so that all households can afford to be more energy efficient.
So there is a really large literature on, and lots of research on, you know, the role of energy efficiency, and there's quite a bit of research in terms of who experiences the benefits, versus the broad sort of costs per the tax base, or more often the utility base, right? I think, so for this analysis, we wouldn't be getting into the use of those revenues, right? We could, I mean, that's sort of something that's aside that would be interesting, but we're not going to be making specific recommendations as to how those revenues could be used for other purposes, because, I mean, again, there's just a multitude, right? So whether it's used for greenhouse gas mitigation or for climate change adaptation, I think is more of a, you know, larger public finance decision about the best way to go about funding these other critical objectives, right? So the way it's written in the scope of work would be that it would, the tax revenues could be split in multiple ways between returning dividends to households, which to your interest, Beth, is really about supporting lower income households in this transition, versus other government spending, right? But we wouldn't be targeting the other government spending in particular ways.
Okay, so are you saying then your report would just basically be, you know, you could do it so that the state retains 20%, for instance, and you wouldn't be commenting on how the state should spend its 20%, but the Tax Review Commission could?
Yes, yeah, you absolutely could, but no, the analysis itself would not, right? I'd be happy to provide sort of resources on thinking about the distribution of those impacts in terms of other studies, and we could maybe include a little bit of that as a literature review, which we actually did to some extent in the first report as well, in terms of policies that layer well with a carbon tax and, you know, complement a carbon tax, and policies that are redundant to or counteractive.
That would be, I would really appreciate that. I think that would be tremendously helpful to us.
Okay. Yeah, we could add a little, we could add some more about those in terms of distributional outcomes.
And Beth, are you familiar with the work that Hawaii Energy does?
No.
That's okay. So just real briefly, I'll keep it brief. So there's a line on everyone's utility bill called the public benefit fee. So everyone pays into this fund, and that money, most of it, a good part of it, goes towards Hawaii Energy, which is the state's energy efficiency contractor, if you will. And so they're tasked with helping everyone, but primarily low to moderate income folks with energy efficiency measures. They give them rebates, they go in and help them install things, they have different programs for them. And as part of last year's performance-based regulation docket with the Public Utilities Commission, we got a performance incentive mechanism passed that will give the utility extra incentives to work with Hawaii Energy to deliver more energy efficiency projects and services to specifically low-income folks. So there are programs out there working on exactly that.
Terrific, thank you.
Which doesn't mean we couldn't say they should do more, right? We can still say that if we think that makes sense.
Right. Okay, additional comments or questions?
I'll just make one for the benefit of everyone. McKenna, we talked about a little bit that it sounds like it's easier or faster contract with you folks than it is with another consultant, just because of I can't remember how you describe it, because of how you work or because of who you work for. Do I understand that right?
Because you're an employee of the state already?
It doesn't have to go through this big RFP process, right? That's something we talked about.
Right. Okay. So I don't know if easier and faster are words I would use to describe this. It's going to be really, really tight. This timing is sort of immensely tight, which makes me a little nervous on the scope of work, you know, just in terms of hitting outcomes for this legislative session. And I see in the chat that your report is due 30 days prior to the start of the session. So yeah, everything is extremely tight because contracting will still take a while, even though we are. So my understanding from what you said, Marie, is that this would be administered by DOTAX. I see ByBars is on here. As state organizations, state agencies, DOTAX and the university can, contract together without RFP. But it still takes a while. So, yeah.
If there are no other questions or comments on this, I think that we need to make a decision today whether we're going to go forward with this or ask staff to. Oh, okay. So Ted just said the budget was 205, so not 250, but still certainly sufficient for our needs, I think. But to go back to this issue, may I have a motion to move forward with the contract that's contemplated under these terms?
So moved.
Thank you, Kate. Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, thank you, Winston. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Then motion carried, and we will be working with staff to make sure that we get the contract done so that you can do the work for us in as timely a way as possible. I know it's going to be a squeeze.
Well, that's great. I think these are important additional questions. I know it doesn't cover the, the full concerns and wanting of, additional work, but in this time frame, I think this is doable, and assuming we can get the contract executed quickly.
Yeah, I didn't mean the work was going to be fast or easy, McKenna. I meant compared to state procurement and RFP, the contracting would be easier. But yeah, I know you're going to be jammed for time either way.
Okay, well, thank you. I believe that is the substantive part of our agenda today. Our next meeting is going to be August 11th, I believe, during which time Kate is going to be telling us about standard deduction and exemption recommendations. And we are going to do that one via video as today. And the following meeting is going to be August 18th. And we can do that face-to-face at the Department of Taxation. So the room has been reserved for us. My understanding is that we can still have people join us by video if necessary, but I do hope that we'll all be able to meet face-to-face. Just because that will be such a nice change from the way we've been working over the past year. Is there anything else that we need to discuss today?
I have a few questions.
Yeah.
So does anybody from the tax department know if a consultant was used to draft the report, and if so, who that might be? Maybe it's a question that Seth might be able to answer, but if possible, I think we should get a handle on what that cost will be so we can properly budget out our remaining budget. I would hate to spend all the money on consultants and find out that we don't have enough money to hire a consultant at the end to pull it all together. So just, I guess, some planning might be very helpful. Ted, do you know the answer to that?
This is Ted Shiraishi from the Department of Taxation. My recollection is that the people that conducted the study wrote the reports. I believe Dr. Uslang did one smaller portion, and he wrote the report for his study. And then I think PFM, if you're talking about your report, I believe it was put together by TRC.
Oh, by staff?
Yeah, well, because there's the consultant report, and then there's the actual commission's report, and I think, I think the last
to the
time it
commission
was
report
done by by Seth's group, but we'll go double check that and get back to you folks.
Well, so we may not be out of pocket for that then if somebody internally can go
Yeah, I
for-
guess it depends on whether or not Seth's group has the capacity to do that.
Okay, good to know.
Thank you.
Sorry, Ted, Winston here. When Seth is back, we could ask him maybe how long it took for the staff to get the entire report together and to hopefully give us a timetable for when we would need to provide everything to them. You think that's a possibility as well?
Yeah, I'm actually trying to look at the old Tax Review Commission report, the report itself, to see if there's any hints as to who drafted. So give me 1 second.
Yeah, when I went through it earlier, I was under the impression that staff drafted it, but I could be wrong.
You may be correct. I believe that's correct. You know, we'll get back to you. I don't want to misspeak here.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thanks, Ted.
I suggest that for our, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kate.
No, and it's sort of related to Alton's question and the timing issue. Have we sort of decided or agreed that we're going to approach PFM to do some of the updating? And even though we may not have the details of the scope of work, is it possible at all to get approval to proceed on that today to work out the details? Because I'm worried about the timing. If we don't make that decision until August, and then we've got to start the RFP process and the scope of work, I just think timing does get tough. Can we take some kind of a, I don't know, preliminary step to move us down the road?
So we are meeting August 11th, which is 2 weeks from now. And Seth is away from town. Yeah,
That's true.
I'm just wondering whether, go ahead, Murray.
I was just going to say, but to Catherine's point, waiting until August 11th and we're already behind the 8 ball a little bit is probably not great. I would assume, I don't know if Ted can comment on this, but I would assume that the advice that Seth gave us for my interaction with Dr. Coffin would apply, which is as long as it's a single TRC member and not 2 or more TRC members, you don't need to do a permitted interaction group. That's if you have more than 1 TRC member. So any one of us, I think, could contact the consultant and start having that conversation to get the ball rolling and see if they're available and so forth. As long as it's just one and there's not any of us meeting outside of this venue, which is exactly what I did with Dr. Kaufman at Seth's instruction.
But I don't think that we necessarily know who the consultant would be for the other work. I know that we had talked about PFM picking up where they left off, but I don't know whether that's practical. Okay, so I will talk to Seth when he gets back, and we'll try to iron out some ways to move forward as quickly as possible, and we'll put this on the agenda to follow up on our consulting priorities, who's going to be doing the writing, try to budget out some of the costs also for getting the consulting work done. Okay, anything else today? If not, I thank you very much, Murray and Dr. Kaufman, and look forward to more work on that issue. And otherwise, we'll see you on August 11th. Meeting is adjourned. It's at 12:45. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you.